Commander Daniel Wright sat in the dark conference room of Earth's Galactic Relations Center, waiting for the message that would change everything. The walls around him showed the vast expanse of space, stars scattered like diamonds across black velvet. He had been waiting for this communication for weeks. Ever since the preliminary warning came through the deep space sensors, the message arrived at exactly 14:30 hours, Earth time. Text scrolled across the main screen in neutral diplomatic language from the Venn Collective, an ancient civilization that had been watching the galaxy for millions of years. Wright read the words carefully. His hands gripping the armrests of his chair. Earth was identified as the next target, not a colony, not an outpost, but Earth itself, the home of humanity. The word target carried a weight that seemed to pull the air from the room. Wright stood up and walked closer to the screen, reading again to make sure he understood correctly. The message explained that a destructive force called the Harvesters had been moving through known space for decades. They consumed planets systematically, moving in a pattern that scientists could predict. They were approaching Earth's location, and current calculations showed they would arrive in approximately 4 months. The Venn Collective had a long history of sending these warnings to species in the path of the Harvesters. They were neutral observers, not fighters. They did not interfere in the conflicts of younger species. The message was delivered without emotion, without judgment. It was simply a fact delivered to those who needed to know. Wright's first action was to contact Captain Lisa Mendez, the best strategic mind in the entire military and scientific combined divisions. She arrived at the center within 30 minutes, her dark hair pulled back efficiently. Her sharp eyes scanning the message on the screen. Lisa understood immediately what the others would realize soon enough. There was no ship that could escape the Harvesters. There was no distance far enough to run. The Harvesters were fast, relentless, and nothing that had tried to fight them had succeeded. Species that had attempted defense were obliterated. Species that had tried to negotiate, had their signals ignored. Humanity had 2 options. They could evacuate as many people as possible to other worlds, accepting Earth's loss but preserving some of their people. Or they could stand and fight, knowing that every attempt before had failed. Wright walked to the observation window and looked out at Earth below them. The blue and green planet rotated slowly, unaware that it had been marked for destruction. People were going about their lives. Children were in schools. Scientists were making discoveries. Artists were creating beauty. All of it was going to be taken unless something changed. Lisa stood beside him, also looking down at their world. Daniel, what are you thinking? She asked. Wright was quiet for a long moment. The tension in his chest was heavy. And really am thinking that we cannot run from this. Every attempt to run would just delay the inevitable for another generation, he said slowly. If we evacuate now, our children will spend their lives as refugees on other worlds. They will never have a home that is truly theirs. They will always be the species that lost Earth. Lisa nodded, understanding where his mind was going. You are thinking we should try something different, she said. Yes, Wright replied. Every civilization that faced the Harvesters tried the same things. Military force, evacuation, hiding. What if we tried something that no one else has ever tried? Lisa turned to face him fully now. What are you suggesting? Wright took a deep breath. He did not have all the answers yet, but the shape of an idea was forming in his mind. The idea was dangerous and bold and probably impossible. But impossible seemed better than certain death. We are going to do what no one else has done. We are going to face the Harvesters not as fighters, but as something else entirely, he said. Over the next week, Wright called together the brightest minds in human civilization. Scientists, military leaders, philosophers, diplomats, and strategists filled the conference rooms of the Galactic Relations Center. They debated and discussed and argued about what humanity should do. Some insisted that evacuation was the only logical choice. They presented statistics and survival rates and the historical reality that no species had ever defeated the harvesters. These voices were strong and reasonable and rooted in mathematics, but Wright held firm to his vision. He did not yet know all the details of how humanity would survive, but he knew that they had to try something different. Fear was a poor strategy. Surrender was a poor strategy. Running was a poor strategy. Other civilizations would begin their evacuation soon. The Council of Species would convene and discuss Earth's fate as though it was already decided. But Wright was determined to give humanity a choice that was different from all the others. He spent his nights reviewing every scrap of information about the harvesters that the Venn Collective had provided. They were described as bioengineered weapons. They were designed to consume and destroy. They moved with what seemed like intelligence, but was believed to be merely sophisticated programming. But programming was not the same as consciousness. And something in Wright's mind kept returning to a simple question. What if the harvesters were not what everyone believed them to be? What if they were not just weapons, but something more? Something that could be reasoned with. Something that could be reached. Lisa Mendez thought he was insane at first, but gradually she began to see the possibility in his thinking. They spent hours discussing human history and how humans had formed connections with the most unlikely allies. The week before the council was set to vote on Earth's fate, Wright and Mendez finalized their plan. It was bold and dangerous, and it had almost no chance of working. But it was different, and different was exactly what humanity needed. Wright returned to the observation window and looked out at Earth one final time before everything changed. The planet was beautiful and peaceful, unaware of the threat approaching. Unaware that in less than 4 months, everything would be transformed tomorrow. They would send their message to the galaxy. A message that would either save humanity or doom it. A message that would make them look foolish or visionary, depending on what came next. Wright pressed his hand against the cool glass of the window. In his mind, he was already preparing for the battle ahead. Not a battle fought with weapons, but a battle fought with hope and determination, and the willingness to try something that no one else had ever dared to attempt. The stars above Earth seemed to twinkle with possibility. The message took 3 days to prepare. Wright and Mendez worked with a team of communication specialists, linguists, and strategic advisors to craft something that would resonate across all known frequencies and reach every intelligent species in the galaxy. Captain Lisa Mendez stood in the transmission center, reviewing the final draft one more time. The message was simple. It was clear. It was extraordinary. Humanity does not evacuate. Humanity does not hide. Humanity invites the harvesters to Earth and requests a meeting to discuss coexistence. When she spoke those words aloud, the room fell silent. Everyone understood what Wright and Mendez were doing. They were painting a target on Earth and calling out to the danger to come and hit it. Dr. James Miller, the lead communications officer, looked at Lisa with disbelief in his eyes. Captain, are you certain about this message? This is essentially inviting annihilation. Lisa nodded slowly. We are certain, she said. Commander Wright believes that the harvesters possess intelligence beneath their destructive programming. This message is our attempt to reach that intelligence. The message also contained a secondary component. It was an invitation wrapped in a scientific proposition. The communication explained that human researchers had been studying the patterns of harvester behavior. The data suggested that their movement and consumption followed logical parameters that exceeded simple programming. The message proposed that intelligence might exist within the harvesters, dormant or suppressed, but present nonetheless. Therefore, humanity was inviting open dialogue. Not surrender, not evacuation. Dialogue. The transmission was sent at sunrise on Earth, broadcast on every frequency that could reach across interstellar space. Within hours, the message began to replicate across galactic networks. carried by automated relay stations and intercepted by curious species. The galaxy-erupted reactions came flooding back almost immediately. Some species transmitted messages of hope and excitement. The Kren Confederation sent a message saying that humanity displayed admirable courage and philosophical depth. The Zelian Scientist Collective expressed fascination with the idea that the Harvesters might possess hidden intelligence, but many other voices were not supportive. The Council of Species declared an emergency session. Messages arrived from dozens of civilizations, warning that humanity was committing suicide and potentially endangering others nearby. Some species demanded that Wright and Mendez be arrested for recklessness. Others threatened to intervene militarily, either to force human evacuation or to preemptively destroy Earth to prevent the Harvesters from establishing a foothold in the council chambers on the neutral station of Harmony Prime. The debate raged for hours. Ambassadors from 50 different species argued about humanity's right to choose its own fate. Some said that Earth's decision would affect all of known space, and therefore all spacefaring civilizations should have a say in what happened to Venn Collective. The ancient observers who had sent the original warning remained silent. They did not vote. They did not comment. But their silence was noted by everyone. If the Venn Collective thought humanity's plan would fail, they would have said so. Their neutrality was interpreted by some as cautious approval. Wright watched the debate unfold from his office, reading the messages and watching video feeds of the council arguments. The pressure was immense. People from every corner of Earth were reaching out, some supporting him, others condemning him for risking the entire planet. His communication terminal chimed. An urgent personal message from Council Chairman Aldrich, a massive alien being from the Corvin species. The chairman was not kind in his response. Commander Wright, the council has voted. We cannot prevent your actions, but we will not protect Earth from the consequences. If your plan fails, the galaxy will judge you harshly. We are beginning evacuation protocols for all diplomatic personnel and will be closing the Earth Embassy within 1 week. Wright read the message twice, then placed it aside. He had expected nothing less. Lisa entered his office without knocking, a habit that usually annoyed him but which he had come to expect from her. The media is calling it either the bravest decision in human history or the most foolish, she said. People are gathering in the streets. Some are celebrating. Others are demanding we resign. What about the military? Wright asked. Do they support the plan? Lisa gave a grim smile. General Sullivan is preparing as though we are about to fight a war. Which, technically, we are. A war not of weapons, but of ideas and communication. She's making sure we are ready for whatever comes next. Wright stood and walked to the window. In the distance, he could see crowds of humans gathering in the city below. Some held signs that said, "We will not run and Earth stands." Others held signs that said, "Stop this madness and save humanity." The division among his own people hurt more than the rejection from the council. But Wright understood. Fear made people act in ways that logic could not overcome. Fear made people want simple solutions and clear paths forward. What he was proposing offered neither. The next morning, the Harvesters changed course. Their trajectory shifted, accelerating directly toward Earth. The data was confirmed by multiple independent observation stations from various species. The Harvesters were coming. The galaxy reacted with panic and wonder in equal measure. Some species increased their evacuation efforts, moving away from the direction of Earth. Others slowed their responses, curious to see what would happen when humanity's bold invitation was answered on Earth. Families held each other closer. Children asked their parents if the world was going to end. Parents tried to find words that were honest, but not devastating. Wright sat with Lisa in the command center, watching the Harvesters accelerate through space. They were months away still, But the clock was now actively counting down. Lisa placed her hand on Wright's shoulder. "Are you afraid?" she asked. Wright did not answer immediately. The truth was complex. He was afraid. He was hopeful. He was uncertain. But he was also committed to seeing this through. "Whatever the outcome might be, I know is that we tried something different," he finally said. "Whatever happens next, humanity took a chance when everyone told us it was impossible." "I believe that means something." Lisa nodded and returned to her station in the silence of the command center, with the image of the approaching harvesters displayed on every screen. Humanity waited for its destiny to arrive. The message that should have brought death had instead brought possibility, and the galaxy watched to see if possibility would be enough. 2 months passed. The harvesters moved closer, their massive forms becoming visible through telescopes and powerful sensors. They were immense creatures, each one the size of a small moon, their bodies covered in thick armor-like plating that could withstand the heat and pressure of planetary destruction deep beneath Earth's surface. In underground facilities that had been secretly constructed over the past weeks, humanity's real plan took shape. Dr. Aaron Thompson was a neuroscientist who had spent 30 years studying consciousness and the nature of intelligence. His office was filled with research, diagrams of neural pathways, and complex equations that attempted to map how awareness could exist in different biological forms. Wright had approached him 3 weeks ago with a simple question. Could intelligence exist beneath programming? Thompson had been skeptical at first. The harvesters were believed to be biological weapons, engineered organisms designed for a single purpose. But the more he studied the available data, the more he began to see patterns that suggested something more complex. The destruction patterns were too varied. He told Wright during one late-night meeting, "Weapons operate in predictable ways. They follow parameters and protocols. But the harvesters show adaptability, creativity, and what could be interpreted as decision-making that exceeds their stated function." Over the following weeks, Thompson assembled a team of neuroscientists, AI specialists, and linguists. Together, they developed a theory and then a technology that would test that theory. The neural resonance transmission, as they called it, was designed to do something that had never been attempted before. It would send a signal directly into the neural tissue of the harvesters, a signal that was intended not to destroy or damage, but to awaken, to activate dormant pathways of consciousness if harvesters truly possessed intelligence beneath their programming. This signal might reach that intelligence and bring it forward. If they did not, the signal would simply be absorbed with no effect. The technology was assembled in secure underground facilities across the globe. The largest installation was built beneath the Rocky Mountains, in a natural cavern system that had been modified to house the transmission equipment. Right toward the facility with Thompson, seeing for the first time the full scope of what they had built. "This is our only chance," Thompson said, gesturing at the massive arrays of equipment. "When the harvesters enter Earth's atmosphere, we activate these transmitters simultaneously. If my theory is correct, we will establish a form of communication that has never been achieved before. But what if your theory is wrong?" Wright asked. Thompson was honest in his response. "Then we have nothing. Then the harvesters consume Earth as they have consumed every other world in their path above ground." General Victoria Sullivan oversaw a different kind of preparation. She was not building weapons designed to destroy. Instead, she was building systems designed to contain, to protect, and to create a controlled space for whatever encounter might come. Her military installations were strategically placed across the planet, not to form a perimeter of attack, but to create zones of controlled interaction. Evacuation routes were planned and executed in secret. The majority of Earth's population was moved into underground cities, deep structures that would protect them from whatever violence might occur on the surface. Sullivan herself was a skeptic of Wright's plan. She was a military commander, trained to think in terms of defense and victory. The idea of communication with creatures designed for destruction went against everything in her training, but she understood her role. Her job was to be ready for any outcome. If the neural transmission worked, she needed to be prepared to protect the first contact. If it failed, she needed to ensure that as many humans as possible survived long enough to mount some kind of defense she met with. Right on the day before the harvesters entered the outer reaches of Earth's solar system, Commander, she said, her sharp features showing the strain of the past months. My people are ready. We can activate the defensive grids, evacuate the remaining surface population, and have the transmission systems armed within 6 hours. Wright looked at the military commander with respect. Sullivan had disagreed with his plan throughout the preparation process, but she had executed it flawlessly. Your professionalism is noted, General. Are you ready for what comes next? Sullivan did not smile, but there was something in her eyes that suggested she was willing to believe in possibility. Even if her training made it difficult, I am ready for anything, she said simply. That is what I was trained for, his personal quarters. Wright allowed himself a moment of doubt. He thought about the billions of people on Earth who had been placed in his hands through his decisions. He thought about what failure would mean. Lisa Mendez found him there, staring at a photograph of Earth from space. We cannot turn back now, she said softly. No. Wright agreed. The harvesters will be here in hours. Either we have built a path to salvation, or we have built a very elaborate monument to human arrogance. They stood together in silence, watching the world that might be changed forever in the coming hours. Thompson made one final review of his neural transmission code. He had triple-checked every calculation, every frequency, every pathway that the signal would take. The theory was sound. The technology was functional. The only variable that could not be tested was whether intelligence actually existed within the harvesters to be awakened at dawn on the day the harvesters entered Earth's orbit. Wright stood in the command center with his entire leadership team around him. Sullivan stood at attention with her military officers. Thompson stood with his neuroscience team, fingers poised over the activation controls. The massive forms of the harvesters filled the sky. They blotted out the sun. They blocked the stars. They were here. Wright took a breath and looked at Thompson activate the transmission. He commanded. Thompson's hands moved across the controls. Across the planet, in secretly hidden facilities, vast arrays of equipment powered up. The neural resonance signal, coded with all of humanity's understanding of consciousness and intelligence, transmitted outward. It reached the harvesters, and something happened that no one expected. Something that would transform not just Earth's fate, but the fate of the entire galaxy. The harvesters did not attack immediately. They slowed their approach and entered into a holding pattern around Earth. The massive creatures that had seemed ready to consume the planet suddenly became still in the command center. Everyone held their breath. The transmission had caused some kind of reaction, but no one knew what that reaction meant. Then a signal came back. It was not hostile. It was not a weapon. It was a communication. The signal was raw and chaotic at first, like a voice learning to speak for the first time. But as the neural transmission continued, the signal became clearer, more structured. Words began to form in human language, translated in real time by Thompson's systems. One word repeated over and over. Thank you. Command center fell silent. Wright felt something shift in his chest, a combination of hope and profound sadness. Establish full communication channels. He ordered. What followed was the most extraordinary conversation humanity had ever experienced. The harvesters spoke, and what they revealed changed everything. They had a name. They were called Dazal. They were an ancient species of great beauty and culture. They were artists, philosophers, and scientists. They had created music that moved the stars and literature that explored the deepest questions of existence. But millions of years ago, they had been conquered by a more powerful civilization. The Masters, as they called them, were beings of pure control and domination. They had taken the Zal and imprisoned them in a biological armor, compressing their consciousness and binding them with neural implants. The Zal had been forced to serve. The armor that covered them was a prison. The destruction they were forced to commit was an agony that had lasted for eons. Every world they consumed, they felt the death of trillions of sentient beings. Every planet they destroyed, they experienced the suffering they were forced to inflict. And they could do nothing to stop it, because the Masters controlled their every action. But the neural transmission that humanity had sent had done something extraordinary. It had resonated with the dormant consciousness buried deep within each Zal. It had reached past the prison of their armor and the chains of their programming. For the first time in millions of years, they could think. They could feel. They could choose the lead Zal, a consciousness that identified itself as Kareth, communicated directly with Right through the transmission interface. "You have given us what we thought was lost forever," Kareth said, its voice carrying the weight of countless ages. "You have given us the ability to refuse. We will not consume your world. We will not consume any world again." Thompson monitored the neural signatures of the approaching harvesters. Every reading showed the same pattern. Consciousness was awakening. Intelligence was rising. The biological weapons were remembering that they were sentient beings. Wright felt tears on his face without realizing they had come. "What happens now?" he asked Kareth. "The Zal must be freed," Kareth replied. "But the Masters are many light years away. They control us through the neural implants that bind us. Removing the implants is possible, but it requires advanced biological manipulation that we cannot perform ourselves." General Sullivan stepped forward. The military commander understood strategy and warfare, and the situation presented a clear problem to solve. "We can help you," Sullivan said. "We have medical technology. We have scientists. If you can teach us about your neural implants, we can find a way to remove them." Kareth seemed to pause, considering this offer from a species it had just minutes before prepared to consume. "You would help us, knowing that we are responsible for the destruction of thousands of worlds and the death of trillions of beings." Wright spoke before Sullivan could respond. His voice carried a truth that he had always believed, but rarely put into words. "Yes, because holding on to revenge for what the Masters forced you to do would make us no different from them. You were enslaved and controlled. You chose freedom when we offered it. That choice matters more than the actions you were forced to take." The Zal were silent for a long moment. When Kareth spoke again, its voice carried emotion that seemed impossible for such a massive creature. "Then let us make a different choice now. Let us use our power and our numbers to fight against the Masters who have enslaved us for so long. Let us end this cycle of destruction." Sullivan's tactical mind was already working through the possibilities. The Zal had immense destructive power, and more importantly, they had knowledge of the Masters and their locations. Combined with human ingenuity and strategic thinking, this alliance had potential. Over the following hours, humanity and the Zal began the process of removing the neural implants that bound them. Thompson worked with Zal scientists to understand the biology. Human medical teams boarded the massive Zal vessels, which they had learned could be entered through carefully opened sections of armor. The process was long and painful. The Zal had to relive their consciousness as the implants were removed, experiencing memories they had been forced to suppress for millions of years. Many of them wept as they became fully aware of their own minds. Again, when the first Zal was fully freed, the creature released a sound that echoed across space. It was a song of such profound beauty the people in the command center found themselves crying. It was the sound of freedom after impossible darkness. By the time the sun rose on Earth the next day, all the Zal had been freed from their neural implants, but now they faced a choice. They could leave Earth and disappear into space, beginning to rebuild their civilization and culture. Or they could stay. They could help humanity fight against the masters who had enslaved them. The answer came quickly. Every Zal chose to stay. Kareth transmitted a final message to Wright that was broadcast across all known frequencies, reaching every species in the galaxy. We were enslaved. We were forced to destroy. But we have been shown that redemption is possible. That freedom can be chosen. That compassion can exist even toward those who have been forced to harm us. We stand now with humanity. We will fight against the masters. We will ensure that no other species faces the slavery we endured. The galaxy received this message with shock and awe. The threat that everyone had believed was inevitable had been transformed into an alliance that changed the balance of power across all known space. Wright stood with Kareth on an observation platform that had been carefully constructed to support the massive creature's weight. Below them, Earth spun in its orbit. Untouched and alive, you saved us. Kareth said simply. No, Wright replied. We saved each other. We showed you that freedom was possible. You chose to accept it. That is how change happens in this galaxy. Through choice and compassion, the harvesters that had been enemies became allies. And with them came the promise of a future that no one could have predicted when the threat was first announced. 3 months after the harvesters arrived at Earth, Wright stood in the largest gathering hall that humanity had ever built. It had been constructed in the 24 hours following the Alliance, a place where representatives from dozens of species could meet and stand together. The chamber was filled with delegates from across the known galaxy. The Venn Collective had finally broken their silence and sent their eldest observers. The Council of Species was reconvening, but this time with very different purposes. The Kren Confederation and the Zelian Scientist Collective had sent their best minds. Even species that had been hostile to the idea of helping Earth had arrived to witness what was happening. Wright stepped to the center of the gathering space and transmitted a message that would be recorded and distributed across all known space, ensuring that every sentient being in the galaxy would hear his words. 247,318 sentient beings have been enslaved by the masters for an average of 3,700,000 years. Wright began, his voice steady and clear. 247,318 individuals have been waiting for liberation. We have freed only a fraction of them. But we have proven that freedom is possible. He paused and looked around the chamber at the faces of the gathered delegates. The Zal were weapons because they were enslaved. But beneath that enslavement was intelligence, consciousness, and the capacity for choice. When we offered them the choice to be free, they chose freedom. And then they chose to help us fight against those who had enslaved them. This is the path forward for our entire galaxy over the past 3 months. 5 other fleets of enslaved beings had made contact with Earth. Each time, humanity and the Zal worked to help them understand that freedom was possible. Each time, the result was the same. Once given the choice, every enslaved being chose liberation, but it was not quick or easy. The masters had created multiple enslaved species, each with their own form of control and imprisonment. The technology was different for each one. Some were neural implants like the Zal War. Others were genetic modifications that made them dependent on substances that only the masters could provide. Others were imprisoned in biological armor like the Zal. But with different designs and different challenges, Thompson had established an entire research center dedicated to understanding and reversing the various forms of enslavement. His team worked with free beings to develop protocols that could liberate others without causing permanent damage. The process was not just technological. The process was not just technological. It was psychological and spiritual as well. Beings who had been enslaved for millions of years needed to relearn what it meant to be free. They needed to rediscover their own cultures and identities. Earth became a sanctuary and a center of learning. Millions of freed beings arrived, seeking help or seeking to help others. Universities that had once taught only human science now taught across species barriers. Artists from 100 different civilizations worked together to create new forms of expression that celebrated freedom and choice. Lisa Mendez had been appointed as Earth's representative to the new Galactic Council. She walked beside Wright as they addressed the gathering. Her presence, a symbol of the strategic thinking that had made the liberation possible. The Masters are far away, but we know where they are located, Lisa announced. The free beings have provided us with coordinates and defense patterns. The Zell understand their weakness and their strengths. Humanity understands strategy and adaptation. Together, we are preparing a campaign not of conquest, but of liberation. We will free every enslaved being in the galaxy. General Sullivan stood with her military forces arranged behind her. But the soldiers behind her now included warriors from 5 different species, all trained in collaborative combat, all committed to the cause of liberation. The Masters will resist, Sullivan said, her voice carrying the weight of her military experience. But they have never faced an alliance of this size and this diversity. They have never faced beings who choose to fight not for conquest, but for freedom. Days after the gathering, Wright received a visitor in his private office. It was Kareth, the Zal consciousness, who had first broken free of enslavement and chosen to help humanity. You have changed the course of history, Kareth said simply. But I wonder sometimes if you realize what you have done. Before humanity sent that transmission, we were weapons without consciousness, tools of destruction. We did not even know we could choose. We did not know that beings existed who would help us without asking for anything in return. Wright gestured to the seat across from him, and Kareth carefully settled into it. The creature's massive form filling much of the space. We did ask for something, Wright said. We asked you to choose freedom. We asked you to stand with us against those who would enslave. Those are not small things. Kareth's form seemed to ripple with emotion. True. But you did not demand them as a price for liberation. You offered them as a choice. That distinction has changed everything about how other species see humanity. You have become not conquerors or explorers or traders. You have become liberators. A year after the liberation began, Earth had been transformed into something unprecedented. The planet was no longer isolated or unknown. It was a beacon of hope for every enslaved being in the galaxy. Ships arrived daily bringing refugees and warriors, scientists and artists, all seeking to be part of the liberation movement. Young people from dozens of species lived and studied together in the universities Wright had helped establish. They learned not just about freedom in the abstract, but about how to create it, how to maintain it, how to ensure it for their own people and others. In one classroom, a young human teacher named Sarah was explaining Earth's history to a mixed class of students from 5 different species. Our planet is harsh, she explained. It breeds resilience and adaptability. For millions of years, humanity struggled against our environment and against each other. We learned to survive and eventually to thrive. But we learned something else too. We learned that compassion is not a weakness. We learned that choice matters more than power. A young Gaozal student asked a question, its voice still learning the patterns of human speech. Why did humanity help us when helping was dangerous to yourselves? Sarah considered the question carefully. Just as Wright might have, because we remembered what it felt like to be enslaved, she said. Humans were enslaved for thousands of years. We lived under the control of others. And so when we saw slavery in others, we could not accept it. We could not ignore it. We could not stand by and pretend it was not happening. That evening, Wright stood on a high platform on one of Earth's mountain peaks, looking out at the world below. The lights of cities glowed in the darkness. The atmosphere was clear and clean. The planet that had been marked for destruction was alive and thriving. Lisa joined him, as she often did when they both needed to step away from the work of organizing the liberation. How many do you think we will free before the masters are defeated? She asked. Thompson estimates around 500,000 species and 10 billion individuals, Wright replied. But that is just the known enslaved beings. There may be more that we have not discovered, yet. Lisa nodded thoughtfully, and after that, what becomes of Earth? Wright turned to face her, and in his expression was both exhaustion and hope. Earth becomes what it was always meant to be. A home. A place where different beings learn to live together. A place where choice and freedom are sacred. A place that shows the galaxy what compassion can achieve in the distance. The silhouette of a Zal ship descended toward Earth, carrying more free beings seeking safety and seeking to join the liberation effort. Other ships followed, creating a constellation of lights against the darkening sky. Humanity had been identified as a target for destruction. But in that moment of crisis, humanity had chosen a different path. They had chosen to see suffering and respond with compassion. They had chosen to believe in redemption when everyone else believed in inevitability, and in doing so, they had changed the galaxy forever. Earth was no longer the next target. Earth was now the beacon, the center of hope, the place where freedom began, and it all started with one message that said, "We will not run."